Kalen dropped to his knees, ignoring the shimmering alien technology, and used his bare fingers to rip open a grimy floor panel to expose the raw wires beneath. Beside him, Seraphina's eyes surged with a terrifying rhythmic violet light that pulsed in time with his own frantic heartbeat. The air in the laboratory began to hum, a high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter every glass surface in the room. If you've ever felt like your own chaotic thoughts were a weakness, you might want to see what happens when that chaos becomes a weapon. Stick around to see how a simple mechanic holds the galaxy together. Now, let's see how they ended up in this cage. 3 hours earlier, the steady clinking of a cooling manifold was the only sound in the Aegis maintenance bay. Kalen had been wiped out, his coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid in the copper tang of recycled air. He hadn't expected the alarms or the way the deck plates would buckle like paper under a tectonic shift. The Hegemony warship docked with the grace of a falling moon, its obsidian hull blocking out the distant stars of the sector. Inside the clinical corridors of Aegis Outpost, Kalen found himself pressed against a cold bulkhead, his hand clamped firmly around Seraphina's wrist. She was royalty, a telepath whose lineage stretched back to the first nebulae, yet she clung to him as if he were the only solid object in a dissolving universe. The neural bond had snapped into place the moment he'd pulled her from the breach. It wasn't a gentle greeting, it was a collision. He could feel her fear, a sharp, crystalline cold, while she, in turn, was flooded by the messy, hot radiator burst of his adrenaline. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice echoing inside his skull before her lips even moved. Archon Valeria stepped off the transport flanked by the Cobalt Legion. Their armor was a study in perfect interlocking geometry, a silent testament to a culture that loathed a single hair out of place. The Larius didn't look at Kalen as a man, but as a smudge on a pristine lens. The Archon demanded the bond be severed immediately, his voice a flat, synthesized drone that brooked no argument. He spoke of forced memory wipes and psionic purity. Seraphina's grip tightened, her fingernails digging into Kalen's skin. In that moment, the sterile hallway erupted. Her powers, usually a scalpel-thin stream of influence, flared into a sun-bright shield that knocked the Legionnaires back like discarded toys. The bond wasn't just a connection, it was an amplifier. His human unpredictability was feeding her refined psychic grace, turning a light bulb into a supernova. They weren't executed on the spot, only because the psionic synthetists saw a new toy. The transition to the high-tech Hegemony vessel was a blur of shimmering containment fields and the rhythmic thrum of warp drives. Kalen was led into a chamber of white light and floating sensors, his mind still tethered to Seraphina's in the adjacent room. The scientists moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency, their thoughts a low, buzzing hive mind that Kalen suddenly realized he could hear. He shouldn't have been able to. Humans weren't a psychic species. But as the neural scans deepened, the leakage from Seraphina's mind acted as a bridge. He saw their intent. They didn't want to save her. They wanted to contain the anomaly. They saw Kalen as a catalyst, a dirty fuel source to be spent, and then discarded once they mapped the frequency of his brain. Kalen looked at the surveillance drone hovering nearby, its lens a mocking, perfect circle. He didn't have a telepath's grace, but he knew how to break things that were built too well. The scientist's thoughts were a high-frequency buzz, a collective calculation of how to strip him down to his base components. They didn't see a man, they saw a stabilizer. Kalen's hand went to the grimy wrench tucked into his belt, a heavy piece of iron that had no place in this world of light and mirrors. He didn't wait for the scan to finish. With a roar that was half frustration and half defiance, he swung the tool. The surveillance drone shattered, a spray of sparks and glass coating the floor. He didn't stop there. He lunged for the maintenance panel beneath the primary console, his fingers moving with a frantic, practiced speed that the Hegemony's computers couldn't predict. Logic said the shields were impenetrable. Kalen didn't use logic. He used a short circuit. The ship's psionic dampeners shrieked and died. In the sudden silence, the heavy doors slid open. Overseer Crate walked in, his long, spindly limbs casting shadows that seemed to stretch across the entire room. The scientists froze, their collective mind link shattered by the sudden influx of Kalen's raw, unfiltered intent. Crate didn't raise a weapon. He simply watched as Kalen stood over the ruined panel, knuckles bleeding, chest heaving. "You are a chaotic variable," Crate said, his voice resonating not in the air, but directly against Kalen's eardrums. "Seraphina's power is a river. Without a bed, it floods and destroys. Your mind, it is the stone. You do not direct her, you anchor her." Kalen didn't lower the wrench, then stopped trying to cage us. The overseer tilted his head, a gesture of alien curiosity. He looked at the jagged manual bypass Kalen had forced into their perfect system. It was ugly. It was efficient. It was something no hegemony mind would ever have conceived. "The containment order is rescinded," Crate announced. 20 minutes later, the two of them stood by the reinforced viewport of the observation deck. Below them, the Aegis outpost looked like a tiny speck of dust against the backdrop of the shifting stars. The Hegemony fleet, once a wall of aggressive obsidian, began to realign. The ships weren't charging their weapons, they were broadcasting. Huge data packets began to stream out into the void, reaching toward every corner of the known galaxy. The classification of humanity was changing in real time. They were no longer a primitive footnote or a resource to be managed. They were a catalyst. Kalen looked down at his hands. They were still stained with the grease from the outpost and the blood from the ship's deck. Beside him, Seraphina reached out, her fingers brushing his bruised knuckles. The connection was still there, but the static had cleared. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, rusted terminal key he had used to bypass the breach back on Aegis. It was a simple, blunt object, completely out of place among the glowing holograms of the bridge. He turned the key over in his hand, feeling the weight of it. It was just a tool. But in a galaxy of perfect equations, sometimes a simple piece of iron is the only thing that can keep the bridge from falling. The stars outside didn't look so distant anymore. How would you react if you discovered you were the missing piece in a galactic puzzle you didn't even know existed? If you want to see more stories where the underdog becomes the anchor, subscribe and join us for tomorrow's chronicle.